What makes issues like immigration, equity, inclusion, and societal violence spiritual matters and not just political ones? We're talking with Bishop Julius Trimble about this and much more on Compass, Finding Spirituality in the Everyday. And welcome back to Compass. I'm Ryan Dunn. I got to sit down with Bishop Julius Trimble, who is the General Secretary of the United Methodist Church's General Board of Church and Society. And we explored what it means to live out faith in pursuit of justice, compassion, and beloved community. Bishop Trimble shares his journey from growing up on Chicago's South Side to advocating for social causes on Capitol Hill, while reflecting on the roots of social justice work in our Methodist tradition and within his own life. Along the way, in this conversation, you're going to hear about the United Methodist Church's commitment to issues like health care, racial equity, and creation care, as well as how faith communities can move beyond what Bishop Trimble calls water-based theology and cheap grace to actually embody real love and action. The conversation touches on practical ways to put spirituality into daily practice. We touch on the importance of listening, on self-care, and having bold conversations that really lead to positive change. Whether you're steeped in their Methodist tradition or if you're just curious about the connection between faith and public life, I think this episode invites you to consider how loving boldly and serving joyfully can lead to a more just and compassionate world. So let's jump into that conversation with Bishop Julius Trimble here on Compass. Bishop Trimble, thank you so much for taking the time this morning. I hope it's going well with your soul today.
Thank you, Ryan. It is well with my soul. The sun is shining. It's a chilly day in Washington, D.C., but God is still good.
Yeah, even in Washington, D.C. I want to start with an umbrella question because I'm not sure that a lot of our listeners are going to be overly familiar with the work of the United Methodist Church's General Board of Church and Society. Can you give us maybe a little bit more than an elaborate than an elevator description, but a synopsis of what the work of the General Board of Church and Society is?
Certainly, Ryan. The General Board of Church and Society is the social justice and public witness agency of the United Methodist Church. The GBCS, as we say, abbreviated the General Board of Church and Society, we attempt to equip people of faith to live out the church's social principles, as well as to engage in faithful advocacy for peace, for justice, for liberation. We've been mandated by the United Methodist Church General Conference and by the United Methodist Church's Constitution to make plain our commitment to treat all people of sacred worth, to embrace inclusiveness and racial justice. And we do this, Ryan, as part of the Church Universal, one body of Christ. We acknowledge that not only are all persons of sacred worth, but that we should be about the business of making the world a more just, more fair, more equitable, particularly for the communities where we find United Methodist churches. The United Methodist Church building is located in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. In fact, it's the only non-governmental building on Capitol Hill, right across the street from the Supreme Court and facing the U.S. Capitol building. And it has been here actually longer than the Supreme Court. The building is over 100 years old. So United Methodists have been committed, and the predecessor bodies of United Methodists, to social justice. And we trace that all the way back to John Wesley, who had a commitment to being in ministry with the poor and objecting slavery.
What led you to do this work?
Well, Ryan, I had an impactful experience in 1985. I was still a young pastor serving my first full-time appointed church out of seminary, and I was invited to a United Methodist seminar program sponsored by the General Board of Church and Society. We met in New York City at the United Nations church building, which is across the street from the United Nations building that's owned by the former United Methodist Women, now United Women in Faith. But
Mm.
we have General Board of Church and Society offices in that building as well. And I was invited to a seminar, an educational program for pastors and laypersons as well. And the focus at that time in 1985 was understanding apartheid in South Africa.
Mm.
And then I left there with the inspiration. I remember telling my wife this. I said, I wasn't aware that the United Methodist Church was engaged not only in supporting missionaries, but also supporting the mission of making the world a better place in the area of peace and justice in the
Mm.
way in which we were doing. So I left a full-fledged fan and supporter of the work of church and society.
Okay. All right. And um, can you explain a little bit about why this work is so, I don't know if appealing is the right word, but maybe why you feel driven or called into a position like this?
Well, I think early on in my seminary training, I grew up in the city of Chicago,
Hmm.
neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, and my parents who were both Methodists, before they got married, they wanted to go to the closest Methodist church you could walk to with 6 children. So I'm the
Okay.
fourth of
Makes
6
sense.
with 6 children. So we went to in with that time was a Methodist Episcopal church, and the church that I pretty much spent my childhood and high school years, and when left and went off to college, was very active in the area of social justice. In fact, as a preteen and a teen when in my teen years, actually I was 13 years old. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke at our local congregation in Chicago, and I was inspired then by realizing, you mean the church is not just about getting ready to go to heaven,
Hmm.
trying to live
Hmm.
a spiritual life. It's also about making our communities better, more just, more equitable. And so I was influenced very much by the church I was in. So throughout my ministry as a pastor, and even before becoming a pastor, as a layperson and then a pastor, I've always been committed to not only the what I consider the spiritual side of our being, but also the social side of our being, of how do we build better, more healthier, Ryan, communities that we can actually all flourish in. And so
Yeah.
that really has attracted me to the work of church and society. Later in ministry, I was invited when I became a district superintendent to become a board member on the General Board of Church and Society. And so I served on the board of Church and Society for 8 years and had an opportunity to see close up the work that was being done to advocate for peace and justice, not only in the United States, but really across the globe.
Hmm. It's clear from your story there that the th- the ministry of social justice has been a part of your, I guess, ministerial journey or even spiritual journey. I'm curious, was the term social justice used as you were growing up, or was it so intrinsic in kind of your practice of faith that like this just was the spiritual journey?
Well, that's interesting. The word social justice, I don't recall that. It seems like a term that I've embraced even uh, post seminary.
Hmm.
But I think the term really was even now, even though it's come back around, the term really was around beloved community.
Hmm.
I remember my pastor in our church really focusing on what does an inclusive community look like. So even early on our congregation, embraced persons who were part of the gay community at that time, that were considered the gay community,
Hmm.
and also persons who had been marginalized from their families because maybe of addictions or because of dealing with poverty. So I found that the notion of beloved community was something I was introduced to before I even remember the term social justice being introduced. And so I think they're obviously connected, but that was my early entree into the work of social justice, and not seeing. I had a pastor who was very adamant about not disconnecting the two of
Mm.
the spiritual life and also the life of social witness.
Mm. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I was asking that question about that terminology of social justice because you've released a letter recently, and you seem to be in a practice of sending out some letters from time to time, pastoral letters for the body of believers. In one of your most recent ones, you noted that if a church doesn't want you to speak about issues that may lie under the overarching banner of social justice, so these would be issues like immigration or equity and inclusion or speaking about societal violence, then maybe they shouldn't
Mhm.
invite you to come and preach. So for someone who is a little bit unfamiliar with some of these social teachings, maybe didn't have the background where it was so intrinsic to their faith journey, can you talk a little bit or explain a little bit about why these issues matter to a spiritual life and not just a political life?
Yeah, yes. I think the spiritual life is really rooted into honoring the stories of all of our stories. And
Mm.
so most of us who are longtime church folks, we've been embedded in the biblical story or biblical stories. But our story should also be able to be read and be honored alongside of the biblical stories. And I think there are most people want to be heard, they want to be loved, they want to be respected even before they wanna know what your religious or theological perspective is. I think people really would just wanna know, do they matter?
Mm.
Uh, been said that people wanna know that you care before they care how much you know. And, I believe that, the Bible is really helpful in that sense. The book of James, 2nd chapter talks about, faith without works is dead. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but James 2 says, when someone is hungry or naked, you cannot help them by telling them, go, and the peace of the Lord be with you.
um,
If someone is hungry or naked, or if someone is depressed, Ryan, if someone is dealing with depression or feel the sense of the lack of belonging, I don't think it does them well for us to quote scriptures and just say, go in peace, peace of the Lord be with you. They want to know that we care. And I think that's part of when I say don't invite me to preach, I'm purposely being provocative in the
mhm,
sense that sometimes people want you to preach, but not to mention the fact that people are actually hurting. You
mm,
know, I'll just be a little bit vulnerable here and say, I had family members who were impacted when the government was shut down because they weren't getting paid.
yeah.
So when people aren't getting paid, they can't pay their bills. They can't buy their groceries. And so, should I be afraid to address that issue, that this is an issue of injustice from the pulpit when I know that people in the congregations are impacted by that? Uh,
Mhm.
so that I was intentionally being provocative and don't invite me to preach. I am because the Bible says you can't say that you love God whom you have not seen, and yet you refuse to love your neighbors whom you see every day.
Mm,
And I think that's a pivotal teaching when Jesus says, let's not get this confused. Maybe you don't go to church. Maybe you don't have a personal relationship with Christ. But there's two commandments you can remember: love God, love your neighbor. And I think even people who aren't part of the United Methodist Church or any church, they can resonate with that. They can say, I believe there is a
mm,
God, and I know I have neighbors. So how do we serve as a bridge to connect people with that? The love of God and the love of our neighbors, and the sense that there is an opportunity for belonging when the church embraces. In fact, so when I say social justice, I don't divorce it from love or love. In fact, many have said that justice is really love spoken out loud in the public square.
hmm.
So when people say, "Well, you just," no, I'm not being political at all. I'm not endorsing that pastors should work on drafting political sermons. I'm saying that we have to remember that we're preaching to people who have real problems, who are living in a real society that often is expressed and most recently has been expressed as being somewhat oppressive to certain parts of the population.
Mm.
So it would be hard to speak to a population that's dealing with the reality of ICE raids and families being detained and deported and just talk about getting to heaven when you might be concerned about whether your father or your mother is going to be separated from your family. So I'm really
Yeah.
encouraging our churches to embrace what we as a denomination have said are important. We attempt to bring the vision of life by educating, advocating, connecting United Methodists to upholding, living faith, and seeking justice. And we do that by talking about all kinds of things: creation care, food security, reduction of gun violence, welcoming our neighbors, building bridges to collaboration, global cooperation on addressing problems. So I think Jesus, I say this in the article, Jesus was the Jesus who was unambiguous about rejecting violence, loving your neighbors and enemies, and doing good and embracing the work of peacemaking. So that's the gospel that we embrace. The Jesus who promoted mending the broken relationships, uh, and said that the two greatest commandments are not to be separated or segregated. That is the love of God with all your heart
Mm.
and love your neighbor as yourself.
Mm.
People want to hear that message, Ryan.
Yeah.
Uh, that you mean I have to even love myself, and
Mm.
a lot of that missing today.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. I want to put a little context around this because we're recording this in mid-November 2025. We've gone through a government shutdown in the United States in the process of reopening. Are there a couple initiatives right now that the General Board of Church and Society is working on where you're particularly, I guess, focused on maybe inviting members of the United Methodist Church to get involved?
Yes, we believe that at the local level that United Methodist should be involved, whether it's your local school board or whatever the issues that are involved in your local communities, as well as the general level as well. I mean, the national level. For example, we encourage United Methodists to take action by contacting the congressional representatives and saying that, we want to make sure that people have access to health care. So, there's concern about the support for the Affordable Care Act, support for that. And we don't want to see people losing health care. We think, like in most industrialized nations, healthcare is considered a basic right, and so
Mm.
people have access to healthcare without obstacles. And so we encourage United Methodists and others to reach out to to congressional leaders, as well as work with their state legislators to make sure that even the poorest of the poor have access to healthcare. We have a campaign that we've been working on for several years now and called Grace Over Greed. We think that budgets
Mm.
are moral documents, so that whether it's your church budget
Yeah.
or your family budget or the government's budget, it says something about what we care about. There are trillions of dollars we have invested and made pledge to support militarization, to support our military. And I think we should support our military, but not to the deficit of supporting the social safety net.
Mm.
So we believe that United Methodist should stand and advocate on behalf of immigrants in our communities. We believe that United Methodist should take action by continuing to join opportunities for faithful witness in the area of peace and justice. And we invite people to go to the UMC Justice website, umcjustice.org, and you'll see many of uh, both the campaigns that we support, but also ways in which people can advocate and take advantage of our toolkits for action. We currently work with local congregations who have church and society leadership in their annual conferences and peace and justice advocates, as well as now we have in all of our communities annual conferences, creation care uh, representatives, persons who are committed to supporting climate justice and creation care. So we would encourage people to embrace many of the things that are available, the social principles, either online or ordering that through a Cokesbury or the Resource UMC webpage. And we just believe that people should be engaged both in their local communities, but also in the broader way of witnessing throughout the world.
Mm. You brought up social principles. Can you offer a little definition on what that entails?
Yeah, the social principles are the 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 witness of the United Methodist Church, uh, um, our commitment to the things to bring about justice and equity in the world. They are adopted by the General Conference every 4 years. They are printed in our Book of Discipline or our book, a polity
Mm,
document, if you will.
yeah.
And they talk about the things that we care about. Over 30 different issues, from food justice to global cooperation to economic justice to welcoming persons in our churches, no exclusions, regardless of their status, their origin, or their condition. The social principles address the issues that we have lifted up as being important to United Methodists. And they trace their roots back to 1908 when the first social creed was drafted. So we have long since, as a denomination, been committed to whether it was fair labor practices, or
Mm,
whether it was health care access, whether it's a reduction of gun violence, whether it was care stewardship of God's creation is a big piece of the social principles. But the social principles are something, while they are not considered law of the church, they are
mm,
considered the best practical, theological, and biblically sound uh, beliefs of United Methodists when it comes to issues of social equity and social justice.
mm. You mentioned that in your letter, you were being purposefully provocative. Sometimes being a prophetic voice requires provocation. Certainly, you can look at the Old Testament prophets and some of the actions undertaken there and see that, there's intentional provocation and a line of attention going on there. There were a couple of phrases or words in your letter that I found a little provocative, not in a negative sense, but just in that they piqued my interest, and would
Mhm.
love to hear a little bit more about them. One of them being water-based theology, and the other being cheap grace. What are some marks or characteristics of water-based theology and cheap grace?
Well, thank you, Ryan, for asking that. Well, I use that water-based theology kind of as a metaphor for the various ways in which people attempt to dilute the
Mm,
mandates of Jesus. Jesus says, "Go and teach, go and baptize, but teach everything that I have taught you." And so when we think about making disciples of Jesus Christ, the mission statement of the United Methodist Church is making disciples of Jesus Christ. But the second part of that is for the transformation of the world.
mm,
So water-based theology would be a theology that one might paint in such a way that we focus on making disciples, but not transforming the world. uh, uh, be water-based theology. You think about water-based paint in your house. Water-based paint is, easier to clean and easier to dilute
mm,
and to paint over, as opposed to an oil-based or a paint that's more permanent and more substantive. And, cheap grace, Bonhoeffer and others talked about, this notion that God loves us without any expectation on our behalf. We don't we don't earn our salvation. Jesus did all of the hard work for us on the cross. But cheap grace is expecting to be blessed by God, but not to be a blessing to our neighbors. So that's the best way I put
mm.
it. Uh, grace is, I say grace, the Trimble definition of grace is that God has a printing press and that God God has printed a name tag for everybody. Ryan and Julius have a name tag, and on the back of that name tag is "I love you" from God. That's God's grace. God loves us.
Hmm.
There's nothing we can do to earn that or do it about it. Cheap grace is receiving that love and expecting that we have no responsibility for anyone other than ourselves.
Hmm.
Uh, cheap grace is understanding that, um, that we have food, and that's good, but we don't have responsibility for feeding those. Cheap grace is picking out parts of the scripture but skipping over Matthew 25, 3 through 46, which said when Jesus says, "To the least of these, when I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was in prison, did you visit me? When I was hungry, did you bring me food?" A cheap grace would skip over that and say, "Well, I have I've I've made it by this, uh, the my bootstraps. I raise and when there are people that don't have boots or don't have shoes,
Hmm.
so I believe that God is calling us, to live above that. We're living beneath our blessings when we embrace what I call the water-based theology,
Hmm.
a theology that says, that everybody has to be a Christian and that everybody has to, embrace, what people are now what I call is kind of an oxymoron, Christian nationalism,
Yeah.
uh, as opposed to belonging, as opposed to grace as opposed to beloved community.
Hmm. It struck me as you're talking there that grace, the full experience of grace, involves loving others. It, you noted earlier, however, that a full expression of loving others also involves us loving ourselves. I'm curious how that represents in your life. So, for sure, the work of a minister is a work that involves attention of always feeling like there's more to do or there's
Mhm.
more that could be done. I would suspect that, especially in the realm of advocacy and, well, trying to not just identify some of the places of harm in the world, but also working to overcome those, there's always more that can be done. So, how do you, in a sense, retreat from that for refreshment? Are there practices that you, Bishop Trimble, have in your own life that offer you some, I guess, daily renewal, daily refreshment?
Yeah, yes, since I became general secretary of General Board of Church and Society and living in DC, I'm right across from I can walk to museums that are free.
Mm.
And I happen to enjoy, going to the theater, live theater with my wife and movies just for, uh, what I call sometimes non-redemptive entertainment. And then one of the things, and I encourage just the people that I work with, both, who are in the church and not in the church, one thing, when you read the Bible, you realize sometimes Jesus was unavailable. And I look at that, I said,
Mm.
Jesus sometimes said he went away someplace to rest and
Huh.
and to pray. And I one of the things I do, Ryan, I encourage this to our children are all grown now, but I encourage this to those who are raising families as well. Sometimes you need to be unavailable.
Mm.
And it is not a cruel thing. It's not selfish. But for me, my wife practices this as well. Sometimes we're not available for others, even for I come from a relatively big family, and sometimes, just not available because I need to have the people frequently call it me time. And so it's not so much doing other things. I used to go play table tennis when I was when I was an active bishop at one of our churches that had a table tennis ministry. I
Mm.
thought I was really good, Brian, until I actually went to this table tennis.
Right.
I said, "Oh, these are people who really do mean."
Yeah.
And so, but I would go periodically, and people didn't know I was a bishop or anything. I would just go in my little shorts and my paddle and just enjoy myself. And being unavailable, I think, is something. The other thing is that I find too, I think people, in terms of spiritual disciplines, is what I call humble listening.
Mm.
And Some people do it better than I do, but the opportunity to hear other people's stories and not with no agenda, you know, and
Mm,
not trying to fix them. Sometimes as pastors or Christians, we
yeah.
feel like we have to fix people. When sometimes what I think people what really wanted, people just want to know, does my story even matter?
Mm,
And so I think those are some of the things I do. Being unavailable, finding things that you love to do. And find things that are, I would call cost neutral that
mm.
you don't have to pay big
Right.
money or pay any money for that matter. And also learning how to I'm I'm categorized as an introvert. Some people don't think that, but that's not uncommon for ministers who are to be introverts.
Yeah.
And I do have family members who are true extroverts. So sometimes it's harder for introverts to really uh, find those things that really bring big still. But the Bible tells us for Psalm 46:10, be still and feel the presence of God. And there are passages which I like to embrace, and that is, the times in which Jesus was not available. So being unavailable um, can be medicine for the soul.
Mm. I'd like to end this conversation with an opportunity for you to kind of send us out into the world with a sense of purpose and maybe a call to action. And in your letter, you mentioned that this is a critical season to love boldly, to serve joyfully, to lead courageously. That's part of the vision statement of the United Methodist Church. You mentioned a few moments ago inviting people to maybe notify their Congress people about concerns that they have. But I'm wondering if you might add or have a few more thoughts on some concrete practices or disciplines that our listener who's marching out into the world might be able to adopt in their everyday life that
Mhm.
help us live into that call to love boldly, to serve joyfully, and lead courageously.
Yeah, yes, Ryan. A colleague shared some years ago that conversation can often serve as the currency for positive change.
Hmm.
So I would encourage people to find ways to be in conversation. I said conversation, not debate. In
Yeah.
conversation, find 2 or 3 people that you can be in conversation with. Some of that's happening, and we're helping to facilitate some of that through book studies
Hmm.
through the General Board of Church and Society. But I think people can do that in their local communities, their local congregations, or their friend circles. Uh, some of that happens on social media platforms, but find time for conversations that bring about peace and that create a sense of belonging. That's one of the things I would recommend people do. The other thing is that begin to read the Bible with an open mind.
Hmm.
Read the Bible and say, God, help me to understand what you would want me to understand as I begin to read, whether it's starting from Genesis or starting from the Gospel of Matthew. Uh, Help me to understand it and find places where we can experience belonging, uh, and also find places where you can do good. Uh,
Hmm.
th- John Wesley said, "Do all the good you can in all the places you can, in all the ways that you can, for as long as you can." And it's been proven, Ryan, that those who serve often find a residual or benefit in that service.
Hmm.
So helping others actually is is also the practice of blessing ourselves. I often say we should not leave our churches or leave our prayer circles bragging about how God has blessed us as much as we should leave with the mandate to be a blessing to others.
Hmm.
Uh, I have a personal mission statement, which is to encourage all people with the love of Jesus Christ to rise to their highest potential or to be encouraged. And so my ministry is based on a platform of encouragement because I've been encouraged so much throughout my life. And I believe that that is what God comes to. Jesus says the enemy comes to steal, the steal, to kill, to steal, and to destroy. But I have come that you might have life. And some translations say abundantly. Some say more fully or more completely. And so I really believe, I really believe in the mission statement. So I believe in our vision statement, which is that we should be at this time loving boldly. And so to love boldly for me is easy in this work, because to love boldly means to do justice.
Mm.
As the words say, if you enter into the Methodist building, on the ceiling in the atrium are the words from Micah 6: do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God.
Mm. That is a perfect way to take us out. Bishop Trimble, thank you so much for your time this morning and for sharing your experience with us.
Thanks, Ryan.
Cool. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Compass, Finding Spirituality in the Everyday. We hope today's conversation with Bishop Julius Trimble inspired you to love boldly, serve joyfully, and lead courageously in your own life. Remember, you can find episode notes and, of course, more episodes of Compass by visiting our website at umc.org/compass. It's the perfect place to dive deeper into what we discussed today and to discover other stories that can help you on your spiritual journey. I want to give a huge thank you to the team at United Methodist Communications for making this podcast possible. We truly appreciate their dedication and support. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Compass wherever you get your podcasts. And if today's episode really resonated with you, we'd be really grateful if you could rate and review the podcast. It helps others find our show and join us then on a journey of finding spirituality in the everyday. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode. Until then, take care and keep seeking those moments of grace. Peace.